You've got to make sure that you're not distracted by shadows and whispers from expressing what is actually important or what actually matters. So, while there maybe was a stain on our dress, you know what? The dress is in the wash. And I want to take the opportunity to say what this business school is actually all about. And it comes down to three things. First, no surprise, it's about excellence in teaching and research in the business and management disciplines. Second, it's about what the Vice-Chancellor calls rootedness. That is playing a dynamic educative role in the evolving South African and African situation, particularly where, as an academic institution, we can facilitate and illuminate the conversations between the various opposing stakeholders in our economy, all right, between corporations and government and unions and small business, the unbanked and so on and so forth. Not just being a platform for these conversations to happen, which is important, but particularly bringing the best of local and global solution building to the table, right? That's the stuff that we do as a university, as a business school, in order to illuminate and advance these discussions. Thirdly, at the Wits Business School, we're about engaging and building the future. To explain this, I need to explain what a business school actually is. I'm lucky enough, and I do count myself lucky, to have learnt and taught at some of the world's top business schools. And I can tell you this, a business school is not you hear this around a kind of a cathedral of capitalism or a breeding ground for the corporate raiders and so on and so forth. That's Hollywood. Right? A good business school is a laboratory of the future. It's a place where talent, business and management talent is identified and then educated in the best practices based on the best research, and then connected with networks of influence and money and capital, such that that talent is able to see the path to the organizations and institutions of tomorrow and walk that path. That's what a business school is. At MANEX, we cheat a little bit, I'll confess, and we give ourselves the benefit of hindsight when we make an award to someone tonight who dreamed up something and built it. So that's where we're going this evening, to acknowledge the past as a way of inspiring the future.
If I should say one thing about the business world and try and unpack it, is to say that the business of the business world is to make profit and to be sustainable. If one looks at the Wits Business School in the context of the university, in the context of the role that it has to play, to in fact produce a kind of service to business to the extent that that service has to be delivered in an excellent way, I think it's apt to say that if we're talking about a school, we have to first start to talk about the actual role within the context of the university. We have to do something about the Wits Business School so that it can take its rightful place again as being the premier business school within South Africa. Now, I say that that without trepidation, because I believe that it is, and it should, and it will be the best business school in South Africa. It was first formed to provide executive education, and it's still a strong component of the business school. In fact, to the extent, and I'll go to my script now, that there has been an explosion of executive courses in the Wits Business School. And to the point where Adam comes to me with somebody and says, we have this client and we have to provide this service to that client. And I say to him, Adam, I'm sorry, we can't always do the things that business require us to do all the time because we work in a regulatory environment. And I think it's very important, just like business, the Wits Business School work in a regulatory environment, and it's important to, in fact, take note of that. The other role of the business school is to provide people with postgraduate degrees, and the MBA program has for a long time, and will be for a long time, the mainstay and the flagship program of the business school. And it should continue. But I think, again, I come back to the regulatory environment in which we work. And again, as part of what I have to do is to make sure that we work within that framework, even though there are pressures from outside bodies for accreditation and for us to have this international footprint. But I do believe that if we tailor the programs which we are offering within the business school based on excellence, based on the need, and based on what the international markets tell us, then I believe we are on the right path. It's all about good management and good leadership. And I think whether one is in the business school or whether one is at the helm of a university or whether one is the CEO of a company, it's leadership and management that, in fact, is going to be the enduring qualities that one needs.
And in these days of diversification, he is a person who followed the wisdom of Andrew Carnegie, who said, put all of your eggs in one basket and then watch that basket. His story and the story of his company are both well known, and both have been described in superlatives in many, many fora. In introducing him tonight, I have chosen to highlight those characteristics that I particularly admire. Firstly, I admire him as an innovator. From the seminal idea that was the genesis of his business to the new ideas that sustain its growth to this day, our MANEX winner this year has never stopped looking for creative new solutions and products. Allied to this, I admire him as a change agent. Good businessmen change businesses. Great business people change industries, but business legends change the world. I think our winner tonight has done the first two, and changing the world is a work in progress. I admire him as an entrepreneur. The best definition of an entrepreneur that I ever heard was someone who pursues opportunity beyond the resources controlled. And from the outset, his vision and his dreams exceeded his resources, but he found the people and the capital to craft his dream of societal value. Few things are more important than the particular service our MANEX winner's business renders to society, and he has been rewarded accordingly.
There is a fundamental cognitive error that we make whenever we hear about kind of how skew things are. 1% of people control 40% of the wealth, or 2% of the websites get 80% of the traffic, that kind of stuff. We tend to think that that's an aberration. Kind of offends our sense of uniformity. And why is that? The reason is because we taught at an early age that the world is kind of uniform, right? It's Gaussian. We taught about a bell-shaped curve, and we think that everything is normally distributed, right? That's incorrect. Virtually nothing is normally distributed. I urge you to find something that truly is Gaussian in shape. Its distribution is Gaussian. In fact, the only thing I think only I think that is Gaussian, are those kind of things that are natural, that are forces of nature. So your IQ is distributed normally, a mean of 100, a standard deviation of 15. So there's a big proportion between 85 and 115. That's normal. But everything else you see is not normal. In fact, we're finding more and more in a connected world, in an interconnected world, the complexity, things are what we call Pareto, a long tail. Long tail, a small proportion in the end controls the whole system. And I'd argue virtually everything you see is Pareto distributed, named after the Italian economist who came up with that idea of this very long tail distribution. It's pervasive. How cancer cells multiply, sizes of cities, healthcare costs, they're all Pareto distributed. Virtually nothing is Gaussian. So it really is pervasive. The other point about it, it's remarkably stubborn, right? So if you look at Gini coefficients in countries, you'll find that no matter what social system or political system they have, they tend to have great income inequality. You probably know this, that China is more unequal than America. Its Gini coefficient is higher. So if you superimpose socialism, communism, capitalism, you never get uniformity of income. You get this Pareto effect. So it tends to be stubborn. And the last point about it that I find amazing is that it's recursive. What I mean by that, and I know that in healthcare, that 20% of the people consume 80% of the expenses, right? But amazingly, in that 20%, the 20% of the sickest consume 80% of those expenses. You follow? And the 20% of those sickest consume 80% of those expenses. So inside the tail is a tail. You follow? So Pareto is not only kind of pervasive, it's recursive. It has all of these properties. So the question is that a terrible conclusion? I know it offends us when we hear about this long tail. But I've got to tell you, it's a very exciting idea because to an extent, what it means is that systems are driven in the tail, right? If the world were Gaussian, if everything was distributed normally, to change a system, you'd have to change everything because it's got to stay in proportion. You follow? So to shift a system, you've got to shift everything. When you have a Pareto distribution, I would argue that's in everything, the truth is that to change a system requires work in the tail. You follow? It's an amazing thing. A few people can change society. A business school can change society. And that's the truth of, I think, a world that we live in. And so I think that this award for me is remarkably meaningful. I think the university has an amazing role to play because I believe very strongly that it's work in the tail that benefits society, that changes society. And the excellence of the business school, the excellence of people like Mark Lamberti and the people that will come, hopefully after me, can change society. And I think that's remarkable.
What constitutes management excellence in these different organizations? And despite the incredible differences between the private sector, the public and policy space, and academia, I think it boils down to two things. The first is to have a clear sense of where one is going, a clear direction, and the second is to have excellent people. I loved your tale about the Pareto distributions. I thought that was wonderful. And what I think is interesting about it is this idea that within excellence there is excellence. So within the excellence that Wits represents, we have an excellence business school. Within that excellent business school, we have award winners, the top students who come out here. And within those top award winners here, we will find truly exceptional people who go on to become MANEX Award winners.